following message is a presentation of Valley Metro Church, a community of believers dedicated to knowing God and making Him known.
Paul is writing to the Romans. We're in Romans today, chapter 4. We're continuing where we left off last week. And he started talking about Abraham. Paul's writing and says, regarding faith, you cannot get a better example than Abraham. Abraham is called the father of faith. So Abraham's like a big deal when it comes to faith. And he's explaining that Abraham knew how it worked, and he discovered a bunch of stuff, and he uses this analogy with Abraham. Now, to set it up, for those of you who weren't here last week, Abraham lived out in, there was no nation of Israel. There was no Jewish people yet. Abraham lived out in modern-day Iraq. They were the Chaldeans out there. So he was kind of like an Iraqi, a Chaldean guy. And God and his people used to worship the moon. Okay, they're out there at night barking at the moon, and God's looking down saying, Abraham, turn, follow me. I got a whole different life and a future for you, and it's going to be this way. Leave everything you know here, because I've got a whole promise and a future. And I would say the same is true with us. God is telling us to leave some things behind. Come and follow me. I got a hope and a future for you, but stay with me and stay focused. Come with me on the journey, and there's going to be a whole bunch of promises for you. Abraham was the first one to get in on this. He discovered some great things. It was not through law that Abraham and his offspring received the promise that he would be heir of the world, but through the righteousness that comes by faith. For if those who live by law are heirs, faith has no value and the promise is worthless, because law brings wrath. And where there is no law, there is no transgression. Therefore, the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring, not only those who are of the law, but also those who are of the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. He is our father in the sight of God, in whom he believed, the God who gives life to the dead and calls things that are not as though they are. Abraham believed God no matter what. Abraham got in on the promises of God. Many times you and I go, yeah, God may be saying that, but, and we have an excuse or a reason, once again, that we're an exception. But what he did here is he walked in the promises of God, and he got in on the promises of God. And there was more and more and more promises of God, but he had to walk in faith. It wasn't obvious. It was just trusting God. If you said it, I believe it. Here goes. It wasn't like, yeah, you might have said it, but surely you didn't mean me. Or you might have said it, but Lord, you don't understand my situation. No, none of those things. God, you said it. I believe it. Here goes. And then he started to get in on all these promises. I would suggest, just like Abraham, this is what it takes, guys, if we're going to leave a legacy in our life. And I don't know how you want to check out of this life, but I want to check out of this life looking in the rearview mirror with a big old smile, don't you? Don't you want to look back and go, hey, you know what? I have no regrets. There's a legacy, and it was all God's grace and glory, but that was amazing. That's how I want to check out. If you want to be like Abraham and you want to leave legacy, if you want to be like Abraham and you would love God to use you to be a history maker, I mean, how many want to be a history maker? I mean, that would be cool for the living God of the universe, who is always looking for people to use and do things through. How about he picks you? How cool would that be? He's still looking for people to choose. He's always looking for the faithful. And if we pass the little tests, he says, if you're faithful with little things, I'll put you in faithful of greater things. This is God's economy, the way it works. So you start taking steps of faith, God blesses that. He'll give you more responsibility. It says, God who gives life to the dead and calls things that are not as though they were. Did you know that God can call dead things to life, and that God can actually call things that are not as though they are? If you and I are going to get in on any discovery regarding the things of faith, if we're going to gain anything like Abraham did, this is our first point this morning, in fact. Remember, God calls into existence things that do not exist. God actually calls things that are not as though they are. In other words, guys, When God told Abraham, you're going to have a promise, and it's going to come through a son, and Abraham doesn't have a son, and Abraham can't have a son, and Abraham's tried to have a son, and Abraham's too old to have a son, it doesn't matter. Because if God said it, God can call into existence, amen? He can call into existence things that don't exist. That is the very nature of the living God. God can speak things into existence. We can't. God can. That's what's amazing. And if that's the kind of God we serve, that's the kind of faith we can walk in. This is an enormous step when it comes to what did Abraham gain regarding the matter of faith, and what did Abraham earn? That's how this whole passage begins. What did he gain? What did he earn regarding faith? Here's a perfect step. Here's a perfect snapshot of what Abraham understood. Abraham knew, I might not understand all these steps. I don't have to. God said it. I believe it. He can call things into existence. And I would suggest, guys, that it's the same for you and I. If there's an area in your life that God is calling you to walk in faith to, you got to walk in faith no matter what it looks like. In fact, faith by definition is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things unseen, the conviction of things you do not see. So faith by definition is walking in the unseen. If you're walking in the visible, it is not faith at all. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. This is huge, guys, because there are some who, as a believer, they believe what God did and they believe what Jesus did, but when it comes to the rest of their Christian life, they kind of end up walking like a Christian who's under the law. They kind of walk as believers with kind of rules, regulations, and no faith. They kind of walk in the natural. This passage already told us earlier, it says that the promises come by faith, and it also says that those who live under the law, the promise is worthless. In other words, if you're living under the law, you don't even get in on the promises of God. Why? Because they come by faith. Check this out. If you're a Christian and you're not walking in faith, and you're walking to the rules and regulations of what you think Christian parameters are, which are healthy, but that's your religion, if that's it, it says you're not walking in the promises of God because you're not walking in faith. This is telling us that as believers, we're declared righteous through faith, continue to walk right before God, but walk in faith as you're walking right before God. Because as you're walking in faith, promises come to pass and come to be unfolded. In this case, regarding things that were not even on the horizon. Looking out there going, I don't know, God's telling me, but I see nothing out there. It's okay. It's okay if you see nothing. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of the unseen. You're supposed to see nothing. Do you realize that? When you're walking in faith, you're not supposed to see what you're supposed to say, God, if you said to do this, I'm going to do it. If your word says to do it, I'm going to do it. And that's what's going on right here. Here's the problem, guys. Because of our limitations, we don't see what God sees. See, God is in the eternal realm. God sees everything with perfect clarity. We tend to live in the natural, and we don't see way down the road. For example, you're driving on the freeway, and the traffic's moving along, but there's going to be an accident ahead. You and I don't see that, right? Consider God flying in the chopper. He sees everything. If you and I are down the freeway, we're bumper to bumper, and we say, this is ridiculous, I'm pulling off the freeway, I can't handle this any longer. God would be saying, yeah, but what you don't realize is that it's only for another quarter mile, and then it's wide open. But we don't realize that. See, God sees things different from what we do. We tend to function in the natural. God is looking with a completely different vantage point, saying, I have promises, will you continue to walk in faith? And we sometimes do not do that. See, He sees things different. God would say, press on, take hold, it's coming. But we say, I don't see it, maybe it's not coming, maybe I'll change my direction.
This has been a presentation of Valley Metro Church. To hear more messages or to support future podcasts, please visit valleymetrochurch.com.